The day after the first experience, we were able to meet with the maestros. And he asked, like, how can I basically be of help to you? And I said, I was trying to cry last night, but I kept muffling my cries. And he said, basically kind of something to the sentiment of, like, closed mouths don't get fed. So in that moment, when I'm having this 5-MeO experience, I'm like, well, let her rip then, just get it out. And it was all the grief that I had been holding from all the loss, from the loss of my father, from the loss of my mentor, from the loss of friends along the way that also had completed suicide. I was carrying all of this grief like a bookcase on my back, and I was like, it's time to let it go. Like, there's work for you to do, and you can't keep carrying this. It's gonna slow you down, so let it go.
Welcome to Plantscendence, the podcast where we talk to people about their most significant psychedelic experiences and how those experiences profoundly changed their lives. I'm John Reese. Today's guest is Itzel Barakat, who is a Panamanian-American who served for 6 years in the United States Air Force. She returned to California, where she resumed her federal service as a wildland firefighter with the U.S. Forest Service. After being deeply impacted by her first plant medicine journey, she began to apprentice as a facilitator at plant medicine retreats organized by a number of veteran nonprofit organizations. She is also a veteran liaison and board member at Warhorse Creek, an organization that provides equine-assisted coaching for trauma-affected veterans and first responders. Itzel is currently in pursuit of her master's degree in clinical psychology to become a somatic therapist. Her goal as a therapist is to provide a whole-person approach in assisting veterans, first responders, LGBTQ+ individuals, and other trauma-affected groups. So we're here today and have a really special guest, Itzel Barakat. It's also interesting that it's Veterans Day weekend, and here we are interviewing. You're my first veteran, and which I'm really excited about because I know that I've talked to many people and I've seen a couple of documentaries and how important this is. So it's really exciting to have a chance to talk to you, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So, we usually jump straight into your first experiences and then your more significant experiences.
So when I got out of the military of active duty in 2009, some of the first things that started to show for me were the lack of sleep. So I immediately developed insomnia after my second deployment. So initially, my first source of non-pharmaceutical, plant-based medicine was cannabis. And a friend of mine introduced me to that. We went, and got our medical papers at the time when Prop 265 was around. And basically a year after that, she said, let's go camping and let's go do psilocybin. And at that time, I knew that I was different. I didn't come back the same. And there weren't a lot of people that I could talk to about that experience.
How do you feel you were different?
Well, I had deployed about 3 times. And by the second time, I just felt like a shell of my former self, just kind of operating on autopilot and not understanding that those effects were going to carry out about 10 years later. I just kind of kept pushing because that's what we're trained to do. We're trained to compartmentalize really well and continue doing our job.
Right. And what did you actually do in the Air Force?
I was an aviation operations manager. And just to be clear, I wasn't on the front lines. I was aviation operations support to pilots. And when I was deployed, I was deploying with search and rescue squadrons and a different facet of the Air Force. So it was a lot of day in, day out, witnessing and seeing things that other people shouldn't see, much like drone pilots.
Well, or you shouldn't see. Anyone shouldn't see. Yeah.
Right. So it kind of stuck with me. I didn't think it would affect me, but over the years, it did really profoundly impact me, and eventually it led me to exiting the military. So fast forwarding to our first camping experience, going and experiencing psilocybin, it was the first heart-opening experience that I had had since I had entered the military. Basically, I was trained to shut everything off except my brain, and operationally, I was great at what I did. I was always and have been a person that's eager to learn, and anything you put in front of me, I'm kind of like a sponge. I absorb everything. So coming from a perspective of nothing down here works, I'm not heart-centered, I'm not, in tune with my emotions, I'm so numb, to then experiencing psilocybin just working its way through my entire being and just being like, hey, here's nature, open up a little bit. And I was sobbing so much. There was a point where my friend and I started to run through, we were in the redwoods, so we were just running through the forest, and I felt like a kid. So I regressed kind of like to a childlike state, and it felt really good to feel like myself again.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Were your other friends also other veterans?
No, I was the only veteran out of that cluster.
And where did you know the people from? How did you know these people?
One of them I had known since high school, so we had been friends throughout and kind of a lifelong friend. And the others by default I knew through them. Had it been anyone else, I would have said no.
Right.
So
yeah,
I was grateful for that.
No. And how long ago was this?
Oh, man, I got it in 2009. I want to say that was 2011.
Oh, so a while ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then do you remember, did you have any visions or, I mean, it's a huge shift to have your heart open, from that. Did that stick with you for a while or did it?
The visuals came in, the trees were incredible and,
Were they talking to you?
Yes. And one of the conversations I remember having that has stuck with me to this day was, why are you so angry? They asked me, and I'm like, what do you mean, why am I angry? I'm angry because I got a lot of stuff that I haven't probably dealt with, And I asked them back, why are you angry? And they said, well, the world is angry. Mm. So that kind of stuck with me that gave me a lot to think about.
Interesting. And that was the main conversation you had with the trees?
Yeah, it was a group of them. So it was just basically a tree stand that I was just kind of walking through and the sun was shining through them. And yeah, that was mainly the conversation I had. And kind of the conversation ceased and I kept walking, but it gave me just so much to ponder on of like, well, why am I actually angry? And it gave me a lot of work to do later on. Did
you come to any realizations about why you were so angry or?
Obviously my time in service, there was a lot to digest there. And I still was in the conditioning of compartmentalizing, especially because at that time, I was still very reluctant to going into talk therapy. And there was very much a stigma around mental health. And in the military, you tried to go or even think about doing that, and your command is looking down on you, and it's highly discouraged.
Really?
At that time, yes.
So is it better now, like in terms of the military's attitude towards mental health?
I'm not sure about the military so much as the VA. I know that the VA has made more of an effort to focus on that. At one point they denied, back in when they were getting World War II vets, it was this very big thing that's like, oh, PTSD didn't exist until, research started to come up, treatments started to come up, when shell shock was finally established that this is a real thing is when we started to see a different shift. And it's taken a long time. Right. We're in 2023 now, and you go to the VA or you call the VA, and now the hotline has, if you're thinking about committing suicide, call this or text this number, which was unheard of before.
Right.
So it is a slow move to progress, but the VA is doing what they can.
I guess in the sense they don't want to acknowledge it because then they are acknowledging a fundamental problem with war.
I guess so. When it comes down to it, the military is really good at training people, or any government agency for that matter is really good at training people. But on the other side of it, when people are exiting, it's like, all right, see ya, best of luck.
Yeah.
There isn't this continuity or transitional care. They're doing a lot better now. As I hear active duty members that are coming out, there are a little bit more resources available to them, but it's still a gap that is needing to be bridged as far as, here are the resources, and oh, by the way, just know, especially if you deployed or if you experience, because at this point, it's not just deployments. Being in the military has its it's side effects, for lack of a better expression. And for some, being in service, even without deploying, they do tend to develop PTS or due to their experience.
Why do you call it PTS versus PTSD? And maybe I'm just like ignorant and behind the times, but...
I personally have made it a point to use post-traumatic stress instead of saying it's a disorder, because it very much attaches to the mindset of like the 50s of, diagnosing people and saying, this is an illness or this is a disorder. And here's the reality of it. People, veterans specifically, when they go seek mental health services, a lot of the time, yes, this is something that we're going to experience the rest of our lives, but it can be mitigated through treatment, through entheogens, through different types of therapeutic modalities that enable us to have a better quality of life despite our experience.
All right. So why do you feel that entheogens are good for PTS?
From a neurological standpoint, there's this rewiring that happens, and obviously there are these new neural pathways that are being created. Ultimately, that allows a reset to the brain. It's something that gives hope for, at least it gave me hope of like, well, all right, like I can actually change these things that I'm experiencing physiologically, neurologically, that I've been told I was never able to change.
Right.
I think that it is very much a life-saving intervention that gives more than just hope, but a better quality of life.
Cool. So you had the 1 or 2 experiences in the forest.
Yeah.
Were you camping?
Yeah, we camped and then we found a trail to go on. The second experience was really interesting because we ended up running into a bear.
Oh my God. While you were tripping?
Oh yeah, which was quite the experience because, I mean, it was one of the friend group. Like we were just kind of looking off and we were tripping. Like we saw clouds swirling. The sky was just gorgeous. And then we just feel this presence behind us. And we both look at each other and I asked him, like, you feel that? He was like, yeah. We just slowly turned around and we see this bear just coming up the trail, just sniffing around. And our other friends were basically on the other side of the trail closest to the bear. So they're on top of this rock, and I just tell them just quietly, I'm just like, stay exactly where you are, don't move. I'm sure if this bear wanted to mess us up, it would have done it already. So just hang tight for a bit. And they were just freaking out. And the bear just kind of went up the hillside and disappeared. But yeah, it was quite the experience. I personally was just in awe. Having this psychedelic experience and then also like seeing this like monstrosity of nature just kind of just pop in to say hello. So
did you feel like you had any kind of like connection with the bear?
I definitely felt no fear. And it just sparked curiosity in me because I'm just like, I've never seen one up this close. And
how far away was it?
I want to say it was a good maybe 15 feet. It was not that far away.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So I was just like, okay, well. Yeah.
Wow.
Talk about profound connection with nature.
The trees are talking to you. The
bears
that's kind of an amazing first experience.
Yeah.
So what was your next experience after that?
Not as memorable of an experience. I do remember experiencing more grief. My father had just passed away around that time. So I was in deep grieving, which I think what that experience allowed me to do was kind of purge these heavy feelings that I was experiencing that I didn't know where to place or what to do with them.
That's pretty valuable.
Yeah. And it was a heck of a precursor for what I would experience in the future because it was kind of like putting a pin in that. And it's like, here's a preview of how you can move through your grief and through these experiences. But, we'll put this on pause for now. Right. Here's a taste of it.
Interesting. And that was also psilocybin?
Yeah.
Interesting. And so how long after your first experience was that?
I would probably say that was a year after.
A year after.
Yeah.
And so then did you see your father or did you?
That comes later.
Okay. And are you still a firefighter at this point?
I No, my firefighting experience began in 2013.
Okay.
So after I got out of the military, I went into school, searched for a bit, figuring out. I landed on an apprenticeship with the Forest Service, which there wasn't much time there. It just gave me a break to kind of have a taste of civilian life enough to be like, this isn't for me. I don't like it. So I transitioned into another federal service because it felt right, which gave me a decent cushion because I was still, and this is much like other veterans, just struggling with coming out of that whole structure. This is an institution that basically trains you to do everything you need to do for your job. You're housed, you're fed, all you have to do is go do your job. To then coming out and then basically have no preparation to go into the real world.
Right.
So the Forest Service was a great place to be because it was a very paramilitary organization. There's a lot of adrenaline going, I'm fire engine, hotshot crew, helitat crew. It was all the excitement that I was looking for. Probably one of the best jobs I've ever had other than being a coach now. But it all kind of came to a screeching halt around 2015 when I was serving on a hotshot crew. That's when my PTS started to kick up, and I had no idea. It did not understand why I was feeling the way I was feeling. By 2016, I had made the decision to resign from the Forest Service, and shortly after that, I ended up homeless.
Wow.
Yeah. And halfway through that point, April, on my birthday, I decided, I might have to go to the VA. And that's when I went to East LA Vet Center. I got in touch with someone that basically he saved my life. He said, look, let's get you service connected, because another common theme is once you get out of the military, you don't want to have anything to do with anybody in the military. At least for me, I don't want to be around any of this anymore. I just want to figure out what's normal.
Right.
But I couldn't, at least not for a while. And I want to say by September that year, I had keys in hand for a new place, and I was kind of on the upswing of back in school, trying to figure out things, how to stabilize myself, and just kind of go back to normal life things.
Right. And then, so when you were in the VA, was there any, he saved your life? Was that because there was some counseling involved, right?
That was kind of my first positive experience with the VA and with mental health services, because prior to that, there had been some experiences, few and far between, where it just continued to affirm my own bias towards mental health practitioners. And there's so much irony in that, but...
in that you're becoming one now?
Yes. But it helped me, and little did I know that at that time, it really did help kind of solidify the idea of what not to do.
Right.
And through counseling with this particular counselor, it really helped ground me and was kind of a precursor for what I was to later on experience.
Right.
Because in that process, I didn't know that I had to advocate for myself.
Right. So you had those two psilocybin experiences before this.
Yeah.
And then what brought you back to entheogens then?
So just a little background. While I was kind of searching through the VA system, I ended up meeting another veteran in Long Beach who had told me about a treatment. It's called the stellate ganglion block shot, SGB for short, or known as the God shot. But it's basically a shot that is inserted into the neck cluster where the ganglion nerve cluster is. And it's a mixture of medications that basically shut down your amygdala for 24 hours. Kind of just shuts down the negative chatter, self-talk, all the things, all the garbage that basically is operating kind of as this operating system in the background on a daily basis. And they were also an advocate for psychedelics at that time. That's how I met one of the psychiatrists at the VA in Long Beach that was there at the time that really was able to help me kind of put me on track with a holistic way of treatment for me personally, because I mean, the VA always gives you the gambit of pharmaceutical cocktails, and it's not something that I personally wanted for myself. I mean, for the amount of peers that I had seen struggle and that continued to struggle. I just didn't want that for me. So we looked into different options. We looked at sleep hygiene. We looked at all these different options. And I was also looking for another therapist at that time. She paired me up with a therapist, and we made really good progress. And after they were done with their residency, they left the VA system and our time was up. However, outside of the VA system, which, I felt more comfortable taking this route and kind of taking things into my own hands, I spoke with this therapist and I was like, hey, I really like working with you. And he's like, oh, by the way, I'm a psychedelic assisted therapist. I said, okay, cool. VA doesn't have anything to do with this. Even though ketamine was completely legal at the time, it's not something that the VA at the time was using.
Are they using it now?
I am not entirely sure. I know that they're in trials for MDMA, but I'm not sure about ketamine. Right. But it was something that he offered. I said, would you be interested? And I said, yeah. So we worked with ketamine for, I want to say, a good 6 months. And ultimately that prepared me to do ayahuasca in Costa Rica.
Right. So what was the ketamine therapy like?
It was kind of a at-home program where I was able to administer troches and have these profound experiences. I mean, one of my second trip is where I saw my father and my mentor. For my father, it was just one of those things where I felt deep within me that there was peace and there was happiness and there was this moment of exchange where he was proud of me for where I was at, even though I didn't feel very proud of myself at that time. It just opened up so much.
So did he talk to you or?
No, there weren't words.
Right.
It was just this smile of like, keep going, you're doing great, kid, kind of thing.
And did you have a good relationship with your father?
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
My parents are from Panama. My mother is still alive and she's back home. But it was one of those things where my mom was the disciplinarian and my father was, the one that you could go to and laugh with, and he was a hell of a jokester. So it was nice to be able to have a balance in the home with that. Yeah.
And what did you feel like you needed from the treatment?
I needed a pairing of a therapist that would be able to understand that experience and would be able to decompress with me my experience and also help me integrate these things, which at the time I didn't really know that integration was a thing. It was just more of like, we're having these conversations. How can we implement these things into making substantial life changes as you progress forward?
Yeah. I mean, integration is really important.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. And to have that, and I mean, this country has, considering the huge mental health need in this country, the mental health practitioners are not enough as it is. And then to train people to additionally be facilitators, in an underground world, it's tough. So, but so important.
It's needed for sure. And I think the duality of having those two things together was super key for me, versus just having a normal therapist that could try to understand my experience.
Right.
And then, basically we had it scheduled where the next day, if possible, we would go into therapy and debrief.
Right.
Yeah.
So how did you end up in Costa Rica?
So the therapist that I was working with, his supervisor ended up linking up with an organization called Veterans of War. Veterans of War was looking for candidates, particularly female candidates for an all-female cohort. And they, much like other organizations, basically prepare veterans to go into entheogenic experiences because they know that this is something that will work to help work through PTS and any trauma that has been incurred from the military or been compounded. They were like, hey, what do you think of ayahuasca? I said, what's an ayahuasca? Kind of did my research on it. And I was like, honestly, count me in. I feel like if this is an opportunity, if it's meant to be, I'm sure it'll work out. And I put my name in the hat. I heard from Wiley Gray not long after. we talked. It was a good fit. And about 6 months later, I was down in Costa Rica with the rest of my peers.
And how were those? How many sessions did you do?
We did a total of 4 ceremonies.
What was it like?
There's nothing to compare it to. I do want to say that I felt like doing the psilocybin, all those years prior, leading up to ketamine, I feel like those things really prepared me for what was to come, especially through the difficult parts of navigating through each ceremony. It was like a roto-rooter just kind of went through me and just kind of pulled all the shit that had been sitting there for a really long time, from childhood up to current life.
Did it actually look like a roto-rooter going through you? I mean, some people have what was the visualization of that?
The visualization was actually vines. So I was being wrapped up in my first ceremony. It was very light. I saw my grandmother, which was my mother's mother, and she passed away about 3 months after I was born. So I really didn't get to meet her. And one of my intentions that I went into this experience with was to meet some of my guides. Just a little backstory. In 2020, I lost my mentor to completed suicide, which is kind of one of the reasons why I decided to become a therapist in the first place. He was also, in the mindset of wanting to help other veterans through equine-assisted therapy. And that initially in that experience, that was kind of like my first profound somatic experience. I connected with a wild Mustang that didn't know their backstory, didn't know, what had happened to them, and we just connected. And then an hour and a half later, my cohort, from the college is leaving back to the campground, and I'm sitting there in tears and heart to heart hugging with this, 1,500-pound animal.
Wow.
So he came up to me and was like, can I interview you? And can you tell me, do you mind sharing what just happened?
What do you think it was about the experience with that Mustang that affected you?
Unconditional acceptance. There's no words. There's this wild paired with wild, as we like to use the expression, of, this powerful animal. Even if you try to domesticate them, that will never go away. Mm-hmm. And being able to go in there, because they're giant biofeedback mechanisms, so me going in and just her mirroring that. Well, if you're okay, I'm okay too. It really helped me feel that I wasn't alone.
Right.
Yeah.
I can see it still affects you a lot.
Yeah, I can't say that for very many experiences through my healing journey. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about it. And that's why I'm such an advocate for it and a liaison for this organization. Because
and so
I know
I was asking if you're still involved in that organization.
Absolutely.
What's the name of the organization?
Warhorse Creek. The parent organization is called Living Free, and they're a animal sanctuary up in Idlewild. And Warhorse Creek is basically falling under that umbrella of rescuing wild Mustangs and then connecting them with veterans. The horses typically go through a gentling process and basically working at the pace of the horse, time, patience, in ethical and very humane ways of just kind of letting them be and adjusting and feeling safe so that we can pair them up. So basically how the program came to be, he asked me, hey, do you think that this is something worth creating for veterans? And I said, absolutely. If what I just experienced right now is something that no talk therapy has given me.
Right.
And, for 3 good years, we worked to develop the program. And unfortunately, in November of 2020, as a pandemic was kind of at its height, he kind of chose to exit. And, yeah.
So is he the mentor that you met while on ketamine with your dad?
Yes.
And did he say anything to you in that session? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Did.
So I know we're backtracking here,
but
now
it's kind of the story goes.
I'm kind of curious. So, okay, so what did he say to you?
So when I saw him, I just immediately started to I lost it, because I was never angry with him when this ensued. He was incredible at mentoring me and my creativity. I'm a writer, I'm a photographer, and he just really had an innate ability to see people's talents and just kind of want to bring out the best and foster that in people. And he said, you'd make a hell of a therapist. And at the time when I was in school, I was doing IT, which made no fucking sense at all. But I was like, yeah, I know. I'll do that after I'm done. Like I obviously have to pay the bills, right? But after I got the news, I basically made the decision to become a therapist right then and there. And seeing him in that experience, it was very much just an opportunity of not asking questions, not asking why, because it's none of my business, if I'm being honest. Like, when decisions like that are made, we could never understand what's going through that person's mind.
Right.
So he just smiled and he was like, "Hey, kiddo," because that's what he called me. And I just sobbing, and it was as real as you and me sitting here in this room.
Wow.
I leaned over and I put my head on his shoulder and I just said, "Man, I really fucking miss you. And I'm so sorry that this is what it had to be. But I'm glad you're okay."
Wow.
And I felt it, basically it was time for him to leave. I didn't ask him to stay. I just said, "I know you got to go, but I just want to tell you I love you."
Yeah.
And then he was gone.
Well, it's interesting that I think there's this interesting crossover between psychedelics or entheogens and the paranormal.
Yeah.
Because you really felt like he was there. It wasn't a vision, like you weren't projecting it. Like you really felt that he came.
Yeah.
And just like your dad, they came to visit you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which, I carefully share that with folks, and I'm comfortable sharing it here, but it's not, unless you've done entheogens, it's hard to explain that to someone who, would think that it's just woo-woo, or I'm full of shit, which, I don't have to argue and explain myself. It's just very much my experience, and I know, it's like, I know what I saw, I know what I felt.
Yeah. Okay, so we're in Costa Rica now.
Yeah.
And so the last we saw you, you were wrapped up in vines.
Yeah, wrapped up in vines, and seeing my grandmother kind of just standing by, which was curious. And that's something that the team that was preparing us for this experience, it was nice to be validated in that respect of, like, tap into that. It's real and they're there. It's not a direct way of communication, but there is a line of communication accessible to you. Mm-hmm. And it was just, I'd never expected her to show up. It was very unexpected.
Did she say anything?
No. And usually, in all of these experiences that I've seen loved ones, minus my mentor, there were no words. It was just a showing of things, of timelines, of what I needed to see. So that first night, it was very, very light.
So did you have visions or, during that first night?
Very light.
Yeah. Because my first ayahuasca is like, oh my God, I can't believe this is amazing. I got to tell everyone to do this and blah. And then my next night was like, oh my God, this is really dark. It's like, I'm not telling anyone to do this. And I interviewed my facilitator recently, and she says, well, if you had that second night first, you would never have gone back.
Yeah.
You got to have like a little bit of, an experience of wonder for you to continue, for you to buy into the experience.
Yeah, it's kind of like tilling the ground before planting the seeds and then going through the whole process.
Right. So now I'm eager for the second night.
So the second night was a lot more visual. Like, things were coming in really clear. The room had dissolved, even though it was a very cosmic experience. It went from, being in the ground and in the vines again to then shooting up into what I can only describe as a place that is space and no time. And I always see visuals of eyes, like eyes everywhere.
That would probably freak me out.
You're not the first person to say that. It was just kind of like, it's like a room full of mirrors, but it's just a room full of eyeballs. So that was really interesting.
But when you saw them, it didn't freak you out.
No. Just FYI, there's very little things that can freak me out in this world at this point. So I was just like, oh, cool. Like, I'm just being stared at right now. Whatever. I'm sure there's a meaning behind this. And that was my thinking at the time, of just go with it.
Right.
So I ended up in a room full of titans, which were probably over 70 feet tall. And when I appeared in this space, they didn't face me directly. They just kind of looked at me from the side of their eyes. And I'm like, hey, I don't know if I'm supposed to be here right now, but just know I'm not afraid and I have no ill intent. And that's when there's 4 of them. They shifted and faced me. And at that point, I was just kind of in awe because I'm like, how do you explain this? Like, without sounding insane, you know?
And did they say anything to you?
No words.
No, they're just like, looking at you. And,
yeah, they were like, if you're cool, we're cool.
And they were humanoid?
Humanoid, yeah.
Men and women, or not gender?
Yeah, no gender. It was just these giant entities that were kind of humanoid-ish. And even in the conscious world, I've never seen anything that big before. So I'm just like, this is kind of freaky, but cool. Still a lot of eyes around me. And then I saw a seraphim.
So after the Titans, you saw the seraphim, and then boom.
Yeah, I got rocketed back down into my body.
Did you feel like the seraphim, since you had asked for guides, and the Titans were kind of like guides?
I think they were prepping me for the meeting with my grandma because that's who I asked directly. It was just kind of like this exchange of, there are things in this realm and other realms that while you could have never imagined, just know we exist and we're here. So everything you know about reality is, there's more to everything that you know that meets the eye.
Right.
Which the way I saw it was just this expansion of consciousness. And, you know, the more I experience, the less I know.
So then when you saw your grandmother on the second night, what was that like?
That's when I was kind of like, all right, this is the second night that you're here. Are you one of my guides? And she just nodded yes. That's when she proceeds to show me all of the traumatic instances that have occurred in our lineage. And then she started to connect because before she showed me that, I'm like, I kind of, I had to ask her, I was like, so you're really grandma, right? And she was like, yeah. And there was a story that my mom always tells me that my grandmother had no dentures, no nothing. She just had gums, but she can eat the hell out of a fish. So I told her, I'm like, well, show me your gums. And she smiled, and I was like, all right, you're the real deal. I'm sorry I laughed because I'm like, all right, it's you. And I asked her, I'm like, do you know my dad? And she just kind of gave me this look like, come on, dude, really? You're asking me this? Of course I know your father. And the third and final question that I asked her before she proceeded to show me things was, you know, is he here right now? And she was like, no. So that night he wasn't there. So then she proceeded to show me each connection, all the instances, for example, with my mother, the things that had happened, which just gave me a profound compassion for my mother and empathy.
Can you give an example or?
I know my mom has told me that she had a really rough childhood and there was, you know, her older brothers would beat the living shit out of her, you know? So there were instances where my grandmother vividly showed me like this is the type of life that your mother had. It's one thing to hear it, it's another thing to witness it. To seeing my sister's trauma, and my sister is 14 years my senior, so, you know, she'd been around for a little while, had experienced immigration, but again, it's seeing all these different points in their lives that help me understand why they are the way they are.
So when you're talking about trauma in your lineage, did your grandmother show you intergenerational trauma, like from previous generations?
Yeah, people I've never met. At first, I just didn't understand what I was seeing. And I'm like, who are these people? And just a little bit of backstory, like my grandmother is indigenous from Indians in Talamanca in Costa Rica. And I didn't get it until she tied it to my immediate family, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So when she showed my mother, my father, my sister, and my nephew, and then she finally got to me and telepathically told me, like, this ends with you. All the work that you're doing right now is affecting past generations and future generations. So just know, stay on the path that you're on.
Yeah, I was just talking to a woman who she's a Black facilitator, and she's setting up a church in Atlanta, Georgia. And she was talking about how you're solving the intergenerational trauma, but it's affecting the people in the past, which is kind of fascinating how you can be affecting, your ancestors' trauma.
Yeah. And I mean, when in that space, particularly, I think we all are existing in a space where time and space did not exist. I mean, going forward, going backwards, does it really matter? You're experiencing this snippet in time, and these profound bits of information are being shown to you.
Right.
And then, what do you do with that information?
Right. So is that the end of the second night?
Yes. Okay.
Were you purging during the first or second night at all, or?
That's the third night.
Okay, so tell me about the third night.
So the third night is when I saw my dad, and I saw my mentor. There was a lot of being in the ground. I was in the soil. I was with the bugs. There was, what would you call it? Like, you compost and then things kind of, So, which that did freak me out a little bit, because I'm like, well, I'm just kind of disintegrating, which is like, okay, that kind of makes sense. But
so you're decomposting into the earth.
Yes.
Wow.
And at the time, I was just like, I don't know what the heck is going on, but I'm not getting good feelings about this, but I'm going to just roll with it.
Were there little bugs like eating you and digesting you?
Yeah, to some extent. It was just like,
and
as
like plants, like fungi, kind of like, because to me, I immediately think that they're kind of eating up all your all the shit in your body.
Yeah, which...
Not to put words in your mouth, but is that kind of like what you...
Yeah, it was just this, and it was mainly, looking back, it was mainly in my stomach area, which is kind of the epicenter of what, I've experienced a lot of issues with. So that was happening, and it was interesting because I still got visuals of all these eyes in the room, and as that was happening, the maestra was making her way through the room. I look over to my left, and I mean, the room is not the room. So I see this lavender dragon over this lake. Like, that is her. And I'm like, wow, this woman is a force to be reckoned with. Like, she is powerful. And I just kind of got stuck on that for a second, because I'm like, this is so beautiful. Like, I've never met a human that has this kind of energy. So I don't want to say it was ominous, but it gave me a healthy level of respect for, what was to come, which once it became my turn, that's when the pulling out of shit started. And I was so reluctant because I knew it was going to be fucking brutal. And it was. I mean, she came and she was relentless with me. She got real close and I could feel it. It's just snaking up my intestines. And as soon as it hit my throat, I had already prepared, had my bucket there, and I just went to town. I mean, I puked. And just when I thought I was done, she sang harder. So she was like, oh, you're not done. And I'm like, just that's fine. I'm good. I promise I'm good. She was like, no.
So she's singing Icaros.
Yes.
While she's coming to each person, and then she's singing to you.
Yeah, very specific Icaros, where it was just, and I could feel it energetically. She was pulling all the shit out. She just kept going, and I kept going, and I remember a point where I just kind of surrendered in my bucket, and I'm just like, I was just shaking my head back and forth like, no more. And once she was done, I just kind of set my bucket to the side, and I just felt like I got the shit kicked out of me, and I just laid back down. But it felt good afterwards.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, and then do you feel like that kind of pulled everything out of you in a sense?
It pulled what needed to get pulled out in that moment.
Right.
Which was...
Feels like a lot.
Yeah. I want to say that's like a good 5-10 years of shit that was just like, here you go.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, so that's the end of the third night. So fourth night?
Fourth night was brutal because I kept looping.
What do you mean looping?
So I'm super sensitive with my hearing and my senses. I don't know, it's freaky. I have senses like a pregnant basset hound. So that for me especially, and as you know, like in ceremonial places, like when you're on ayahuasca, you can hear anything. You can hear a mouse fart and it sounds so loud. So the person that was next to me was purging audibly as sighs and laughter, and for some reason that night I was so sensitive to that, which other nights like people were making all kinds of noises around me and I didn't give a shit. But for some reason that night, and I was getting pissed about it because I was just like, what the hell is the point of this? Like, why? I'm pretty sure I got what I needed. And then I had the realization, okay, this is your ego talking. You're just here for the ride. It doesn't matter do you have control of this situation right now? Can you just tell her, like, shut up? No. So that basically was my entire night of just writhing through, trying to not be upset, which that was my second intention of just releasing judgment and anger. And yeah,
I guess you got tested.
Yes, I did, because it was one of those things that I was stuck consistently with looping and being upset, and then, basically surrendering to that process of, it's okay. Like, there are so many other people that are going through probably a lot worse shit right now, and you're just sitting here stuck on this. So as soon as they said that the ceremony was done, like, I just jumped up and I left the Maloka. I was like, I'm done. I'm just done. I need to go to sleep. And I couldn't sleep that night, which was...
You couldn't sleep that night? Oh. Great.
Yeah. So
that was the last ceremony on this.
That was the last ceremony.
And so this is 2021.
Yeah.
And then how did this lead you on your journey?
So one of the members of our cohort was a mind-body medicine doctor. And she conducts retreats in Mexico. And we instantly clicked. Like, we had common ground that we're both immigrants. Like, she's from Chile. I'm, my family's from Panama. And there were just things that, again, it was that mentoring where I was so grateful to be able to cross paths with her and her say, I'd like you to come work with me. And I have learned so much from her. I've learned so much from each of the groups that we've worked with, and continuing to work with ayahuasca and 5-MeO, because I had an incredibly powerful experience with 5-MeO. But it has given me the opportunity to, one, learn how to properly be a facilitator, because all the steps that they take at this retreat center are within respecting the traditions and lineages and, properly facilitating without taking or, stealing or borrowing.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. And I've never gone into a ceremony facilitating or assisting where I felt unsafe.
Right. And then do you work with that retreat center works with all kinds of people, I take it?
Yeah.
Right. But you work with veterans, though, too, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm a coach for an organization called Heroic Hearts Project, and they work with my mentor specifically at this retreat center. So I basically assist with preparing clients or being part of the facilitation team or being part of the coaching team, and basically prepping people to go into these experiences and then kind of post-care.
Right. So now you got to tell me about your 5-MeO.
Oh, man.
That's actually, I think, my next. I've not done it yet. And I think it's the woman who I just did my psilocybin journey. She also does 5-MeO. And so I think I'm going to do it with her. I think she's really good. So
yeah. First time I facilitated 5-MeO, and it wasn't me administering. It was just me being there, assistive as a facilitator. It was like being a spiritual doula. So, witnessing anything from rebirth to, there's just nothing to compare it to. So that kind of gave me an idea. And it's the same thing with every medicine that I've worked with. If I'm called to it, if the medicine wants me to work with it, then I will. And last October, while I was down at the retreat center, one of the healers...
What part of Mexico is it in?
This is close to Puerto Vallarta.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's basically a small coastal town where we, take a boat. And this healer, he is working with the Shipibo lineage. And he had 5-MeO, and he asked, like, are you wanting to participate? And when he asked, I was like, okay. And my intention going into this particular experience was I would like to reconcile the relationship with my body and reconnect. And boy, did I get it. When I thought my eyes were closed the whole experience. When I asked the shaman, he said that my eyes were open the entire time. I saw pink. I was going through a birth canal.
Wow.
So I was navigating through this birth canal. I was screaming like I was giving birth and being birthed at the same time. And something that I forgot to mention in one of those first ayahuasca experiences, the day after the first experience, we were able to meet with the maestros. And he asked, like, how can I basically be of help to you? And I said, I was trying to cry last night, but I kept muffling my cries. And he said, if you don't cry, then, you know, basically kind of something to the sentiment of, like, closed mouths don't get fed. So if you don't cry, you know, you won't get your needs met.
Right.
So in that moment, when I'm having this 5-MeO experience, I'm like, well, let her rip then. Just get it out. And it was all the grief that I had been holding from all the loss, from the loss of my father, from the loss of my mentor, from the loss of friends along the way that also had completed suicide. I was carrying all of this grief like a bookcase on my back. And I was like, it's time to let it go. Like, there's work for you to do, and you can't keep carrying this. It's going to slow you down. So let it go.
Just makes me think that many people have said that the plants and substances give you what you need.
Yeah, not what you want. Not what you want. I would have liked to have had a more peaceful experience, but I honestly wouldn't change it and have it any other way. I am grateful that I got exactly what I needed, and yeah.
Right.
And
but kind of being birthed and giving birth at the same time, I just thought to myself, wow, what a gift.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing.
Yeah. So.
And so so you're coach with this facilitator, but then where are you at now?
Now I am in grad school, basically a few weeks away from completing my first quarter doing clinical psychology for my master's. I will be doing a somatic focus.
What does that mean, somatic?
Somatic means experiencing in the body. You know, all these things are connected. And if you look from a standpoint of this disconnection, a lot of the ailments and the physical dis-ease that we experience are due to this somatic dissonance that we experience. You know, we're so disconnected from our emotions. Emotions are bad, or we have to curb our emotions. You know, we're not allowed to feel certain things. I'm grateful that entheogens have been able to show me, hey, none of that's true.
Right.
And this is how you can help people.
That's amazing. So are you intending to do psychedelic-assisted therapy, you know, when you graduate? And
yeah,
hopefully it will be approaching legality on some level, but...
Yeah, I have an idea of being able to kind of bring these worlds together. The equine, the entheogenic, and somatic experiencing. They all have a somatic component anyway. So I don't know what that picture is going to look like, but I know that each of these elements can come together at some point and provide something really cool for people and something really necessary for people.
That's amazing. So like potentially having horses at the retreat center, you know, something like that.
Or having people go through their experience, and then the integrative piece could be working with the horses afterwards, which is kind of what I think I might be inclined to do.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This has been amazing. This has really been, thank you for being so generous with sharing your story.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for listening.
Plantscendence is a production of 8 Above, created by me, John Reese. Edited by Julia Sharp-Levine, with support by Lisa DeLuke. Our theme music is All the Things by Ani Matavos and Lotus Dance by Lucas Straws, both tracks courtesy of Reverse Play. There's more information about our guests in the episode notes, as well as a transcript of this episode on our website, plantscendence.com, and our socials, Plantscendence Pod. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating or review, and most importantly, in the words of the wonderful podcaster Andrew Hickey, tell one person. Word of mouth is the most important way for creative works to be recognized. Thank you for listening.